Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Stars Like Us. I'm your host, Aliza Kelly, and we are in for a real treat today. I am here talking to a former NFL football player turned astrologer. How many people can say that? That cannot be something that is a common professional transition to make. I'm with Ricky Williams, who is a Gemini Sun, a moon in Cancer, a Virgo Rising. Before we started, Ricky was like, wait, hold on a second. I got to kiss my wife. And it was the most charming Cancerian moon thing that I've ever encountered in all of my years in astrology. Ricky is also the founder of an astrology dating app called Lila. And I don't think that Ricky knew that in my former life, I was the co-founder of an astrology dating app. So it's going to be really interesting to talk about how much has changed in the years since that venture for me has closed, which is 2016, to where we are now, 2021. A lot has changed. And also to hear about how somebody goes from one, extremely high profile career in sports, something I know nothing about, into the world of metaphysical magic, which I know a lot about. And I can't imagine that there's a lot of overlap, but maybe there is. Ricky, it is so nice to meet you. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, this is great. In my world, it's changing, but I don't get a chance to talk to a lot of astrologers or even people that are into metaphysics. And so, it's nice to talk to someone where I know that, most of the words that come out of my mouth will actually be understood. So this is great.
Yes, I think that especially with your heavy mercurial chart, communication is obviously incredibly important. Tell us about yourself. Tell us about this journey that you have been on. And I mean, this is what I think is really what's striking me about it, is that to reach the level of success that you had in, I keep saying sports as if it's like a word that I don't know how to pronounce. I don't know what, in football, in sports, in as an athlete, like that takes so much, I would imagine, magic and manifestation and intensity and focus and endurance and hard work. So that alone is like an incredibly magical thing to happen in a lifetime. And then to move away from that into astrology, I can understand how, like, I think I can imagine where threads could be, but I also have no fucking idea what I'm talking about. So I would love to just hear everything that you've endured.
Well, this is the beauty to me, because I've lived it, and it's been, just as confusing for me. And I think that's the first thing that drew me to astrology. It was the first thing that helped me understand, like, the chaos that is me. And so also thinking about it astrologically, I think of Sagittarius, Jupiter, and the ninth house, that they both are connected to sports, but they're also both connected to metaphysics, and it's funny, people that I meet now who don't really know much about football or me as a football player, their question is, how did you survive as a football player? And speaking about that Cancer moon, that it wasn't easy. And I think what you're saying about the hard work and all that stuff is true. But in the type of astrology I practice, I look at the South Node a lot, and the South Node is representing kind of where we've come from, in a sense, the gifts that we've brought with us. But those gifts are interesting because they're gifts of where we naturally have talent and ability. But typically, if you keep leaning on those gifts, they don't lead to much growth and development. That's what the North Node is for.
So are you an evolutionary astrologer?
I'm an evolutionary astrologer. Yeah, evolutionary astrologer. My business partner and mentor, Stephen Forrest. I love him. But yeah, and so he's really, he says in his apprenticeship program that he's trying to create little Stephen Forrests that then individuate into their own way of practicing astrology. So yes, evolutionary astrologer. And so my South Node is in Aries, conjunct Mars. And so the football ability was something that just kind of took over and took me there, took me to, to being one of the best football players in the world. And like, around my Saturn return, I kind of woke up and I was like, well, actually my progressed lunar return, I woke up and I was like, what am I doing? You know, my moon is in the 10th house in Cancer. And so I was like, what am I doing? And I felt like as a football player, I wasn't really helping people. I was just distracting them for a couple of hours on Sundays. And that didn't sit right with me. And about the same time, I started reading for some reason. I started reading metaphysical books. I became fascinated with studying the life of Jesus, Jesus the man. And as I started studying, you know, I found that he was in a part of the Essenes. And so I started reading about that, and it was introduced to spiritual practice. And just on my own, I started doing these meditations, and my mind just kept opening and opening, and ended up in Northern California studying Ayurveda. And part of our Ayurvedic course was we had a yoga class twice a week. And one of the teachers that came to teach the yoga class was a Swami from a local ashram. And after taking that class, I went up to him and I said, you know, that was the most blissful peace I've had in my whole life. Where can I find more of this? And he directed me to the ashram down the road. And so that weekend I went to the ashram, and the head Swami there was a Vedic astrologer. And someone had told her I was a football player. And so she walked up to me and she looked me right in the eye and she said, "Where's your Mars?" And at this time, I knew nothing about astrology. And so I kind of looked at her and I said, I don't know what you're talking about. And then she said, "When you're done eating, come to my office. I want to talk to you." So I gave her my birth information, and I knew my time because I'm a twin. And so it's part of our story.
Oh, a Gemini twin.
And so I know, right? And so she put the birth information in her computer, and we had the most amazing 3-hour conversation where I felt really seen for the first time. And it was kind of that wake up call of realizing that I had been creating so much stress in my life, that Aries South node, you know, and realizing that I was in a place in my life, but also a place physically that I could start to move towards the North node, towards peace and serenity. And I started that path right there. And one of my favorite tools starting then was astrology, because I think of it as a treasure map, you know, a treasure map to find our own hidden treasures.
So was there, at this point, had you already walked away from football? Was that something that you had already reconciled, or was it through this process that you were reconciling it in tandem?
It was both. So I walked away, and I felt good about walking away. The minute I retired from the NFL, I felt this huge weight lift off my shoulders. Almost felt like I was finally free. You know, I was finally free, and I was lost. You know, everything that I had built my life around, I'd given up, and so I was at this kind of ground zero place. And I was comfortable being free, but I was lost. You know, and when I found astrology, things started to make sense. You know, I started to get a sense of what my teacher calls dharma, right? That there is a purpose to my life, and that there's a way to connect to that purpose and get more clarity about it. And so from that point on, I was like, all my free time, I was studying astrology. It was all I could think about, because I was aware of the gift that I was being given, that this was going to help me find myself, find my path. I didn't realize that it would also, you know, lead to me helping other people find their paths through astrology, but it has.
So, and what is the time frame here that we're talking about as well for our listeners, to give them a sort of like, you know, was this something that cascaded? Was this something that was like, you know, as soon as you met that astrologer and started to explore your birth chart, that it was like just mounted? Was it a gradual process? Like, how did this integrate into your life?
Yeah, so at the time I wasn't working, and I was in school studying Ayurveda, and I was on a 100% spiritual path. So it got to the point within a month or two after that reading that all I did was have an astrology book or of some sort in front of me, and I was constantly taking the information in. And anyone who's really taking a deep dive into astrology has probably experienced that. Like, you get a little glimpse of something that makes sense, and then you jump in and you dive, and then within a couple of hours, it's like you lost it, and you get frustrated and like, oh, I can't make it make sense. And then that kind of coming to it and getting fed and then getting away and then coming back. It was that gradual process. And sometimes the intensity of diving in would be as long as 3 months, and then I'd be kind of burned up and I can't make sense. And so I take a little break and then I would come back. But I think part of that is because I was studying on my own. And when I finally found a teacher, someone that could teach me to think astrologically instead of just learning what the symbols mean, that's when things really started to catch on fire for me.
And so did everyone think that you had lost your mind? Like, was everyone like, Ricky is just off the grid? Like we've lost him, nowhere to be found, MIA, just made the worst decision of his life. Like, what was the feedback that you were getting from your peers and from your family?
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. Is everyone said I thought I had lost my mind and that I'd gone off the deep end and I'd ruined my life. That was the consensus. And it's interesting. The first time I sat down and to talk to Stephen Forrest about my chart, he was going through my chart and he got to, I have Uranus in the second house in Scorpio. And he got to my Uranus in the second, and he smiled and he said, that time in your life where you left football and you went on a trip, he says, I think that was one of the best things that ever happened to you. And I kind of looked at him and he said, this Uranus in the second house, he says, it's really about learning to trust your crazy ideas. And what I realized is when I left and everyone thought I was crazy, my experiences was the happiest I'd been in my whole entire life. And so it changed my definition of what friends and family were. To me, friends and family became people that wanted me to be happy. And it helped me individuate. It helped me not care so much about the people who didn't want me to be happy and what they thought about me.
Yeah, I really love that point because, something that I have found in my own practice and in my own self-actualization journey has been, and it happens at different points, but there's always a point where somebody does not understand what you're doing. And even if and it comes from a place of love, but where you have to differentiate yourself from even your closest companions because they either haven't had the experience to be able to personally empathize experientially with you, that they are projecting their own fears, that they have their own limiting beliefs that have been just deeply embedded in them, not even because they themselves are risk averse, but just because society doesn't really create a lot of opportunities to go out on a limb. And especially when you reach certain levels of success, people are like, well, you did it, that's it, period. Anything that steps away from that or would look like a deviation would reflect that you're clearly just like not in your right mind. And it's that those moments, I think, that we can really see that as exactly as you said, like each person is so unique and so individual, and to really honor the full capacity of one's possibility, one's destiny, one's chart. They need to be able to sometimes do things alone, take big risks that there isn't a foundation established in, and to be brave enough to give it a try, even when everyone else is saying it's not a good idea, which can be really, really hard and requires, I think, a lot of tenacity and a lot of bravery.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you described is right at the core of the whole actualization or individuation process, is because you're only going to be yourself when you prioritize being yourself over being what other people want you to be.
Right, totally. I'm also curious, though, how this conversation has continued today, and you're seeing it, I would imagine you're seeing it on your own podcast in some way, shape, or form, where you're still having the conversation of trying to explain like what you're up to, what you're passionate about, and what, and maybe even give permission for others to be able to follow their truth, even if it doesn't make sense to, the collective societal understanding of what success means.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like, I guess on some level I chose it, but I feel like that's kind of my mission in life, is to give people permission to be themselves. And it's not easy. I mean, there's obviously good days when people get it and, it's very rewarding, but like, there's so many days where it feels like I feel like I can feel people's thoughts of, wow, this guy is really kind of crazy. And so, yeah, I launched a podcast called Curious Questions with Ricky Williams. And I made the decision that if I'm going to, do a podcast and I'm going to be talking about things, it needs to be something that I'm interested in. And so I decided to create my podcast around astrology. And as a football player, I got really annoyed with the media because I felt like the questions they were asking me, they weren't talking to me as the person. They were talking to this idea of what they thought a football player should be. And so as I thought about a podcast where I'm bringing on guests, to give them a different experience of speaking to who they are at a deeper level. And I haven't found anything, to help me appreciate who someone is at a deeper level better than astrology. And so when I bring the guest on, I get their birth information, I look at their astrological charts, and I see in the chart what piques my curiosity about this person, and that I allow that to lead my question. And because my background is in sports, a lot of my guests on my podcast have been people related to sports, and mainly men. And for some reason, men are not as open to astrology as women tend to be. And so, and especially
And why do you think that
kinds
is?
of well, I just think there hasn't been enough examples for men that are into astrology. Most of the time when we in pop culture, when we see anything related to astrology, it's usually, an older woman, in a muumuu with blue hair, right? I just think the stereotypes, have created some kind of stigma around it for rational guys, right? And what another thing I found is most of the people that have some kind of resistance to astrology don't really know much about it. And so what's been rewarding about the podcast, and I haven't tried to convince people that astrology works. To me, like, you don't have to prove it to people. Everyone I've had, sat down with and had a real conversation about astrology, they walked away having a sense that there is something to this. Okay. And that's been consistent with the podcast. Pretty much every guest that I've spoken to, even though there was resistance in the interview, as the interview went on, you could feel this sense, and I'm sure you experience this, of when someone feels truly seen. Someone feels truly seen. And what I mean by that is sometimes we have these ideas in our head, and when we think about them to ourselves, they excite us. But when we think about expressing them, we think, oh, someone is going to think I'm crazy. So we keep these things inside. And so many times when I'm doing a reading with someone, I can see that I'm speaking to those things that people keep inside, and they feel empowered to let them move and to express them and to let them go. And that's really what I'm aiming for with the podcast, not just the guests, but the people listening to that, that might share, the same sign, that they hear something, either something that I say or something that the guest says, that gives them permission to be more of themselves.
Something that I think is also just so compelling about your story and how you can translate this material for folks who know you through football is that, at least for me, and I really know nothing about sports, like to an embarrassing degree, but I do know that, like, sports and sports culture, there's a lot of toxic masculinity embedded in it. And a lot of toxic masculinity, I think, also comes from a lot of repressed feelings, and a lot of, just men not having the tools to be able to work through complex emotions and things that are sort of more on in the spectrum of not just like angry or horny or hungry, but also like, passionate or disappointed, or like, the feeling of rejection, and like knowing how to embody that in a way that is healthy and is also inspired. And I think that that's a really interesting, that it's so interesting that you can speak to people who might originally be drawn to you because they know that you were a successful athlete. And then you can sort of almost like, it's like almost like a bait and switch where you're like, actually, let's open up your soul and like crack into what's really going
Yeah,
on and
yeah,
those like those mommy and daddy wounds and let's go there.
yeah.
So I wonder if like, I mean, do you feel like astrology could be the antidote to some of those? I don't know. I mean, I don't want to just summarize it as toxic masculinity, but I guess for lack of a better word, as toxic masculinity.
Well, for sure, no doubt about that. And I would expand it, in this context to all forms of toxicity, you know, all forms of toxicity. And what I didn't mention earlier, but I think is a big part of my story, is that I grew up in a very religious family. So my father was a minister. My father's mother was a minister. My mother's mother was a minister. So growing up, I was in church like 3 days a week. And my favorite thing was to hear stories about Jesus, the healer that worked miracles, and the idea that he preached love, like that resonated with me deeply. And so I feel like when I found astrology, it was waking up that religious spiritual core inside of me. And what I mean by religious is, I mean a system that allows us to make sense of the world around us. Okay. And when we don't have a system that allows us to make sense of the world, then we're left with the form of toxicity, because all we get is polarity. This is right, this is wrong. This is right, this is wrong. And we live our life trying to do what's right and avoid what's wrong. But we never ask the question, who decides what's right or who decides what's wrong? Okay. And so for me, when I found astrology, it got me out of the right and the wrong, and it got me into, where does this fit into my life? Right? How does this make sense? Where does this fit into the whole? And so for me, anyone that uses astrology, it's I think of astrology as a language, but it's always built on top of some kind of belief system. And so, I see people practicing astrology, but their belief system is very materialistic, and so they don't get to the metaphysical, the deeper parts of astrology. But again, growing up a spiritual person and a sensitive person, I found astrology, and it helped. I'm a ninth house Gemini, with the sun conjunct Jupiter. So it helped me connect the dots, And I remember the moment, that as a football player, right? One of the best football players in the world, and struggling with, is this really what I want to be doing? And then walking away, okay? A little bit of confusion. As I started to understand astrology more in transits and progressions, the first thing I did is I went back to that time in my life where I gave it all up. And I saw that,
what was going
the
on?
planet Uranus.
Yeah, you were having your progressed
Yeah.
lunar return.
My progressed lunar return in the 10th house. Okay. And I interpret a 10th house Cancer moon as someone who's here to be a healer. Okay. And I was a football player, exactly the opposite. And Uranus was making a square.
Right, actually causing yourself hurt, I would imagine too. So like
exactly
antithetical to healing.
Yes. Oh, wow. That's a beautiful insight, because it's exactly what it was, that I was abusing my body, not even paying attention to it. But it led me on a healing journey, which activated my healing potentials, which is whole amazing story in and of itself. But and it was a Uranus squaring my sun, right? So this individuation process. Well, I call, when Uranus hits something in our chart, it points out where we've been faking the funk, where we've been kind of trying to fit in and do what other people want us to do, and ignoring that crazy little voice inside. And so Uranian times, it's an opportunity to start to finally listen to that crazy voice inside. So Uranus squaring my sun, and then the day I retired, Jupiter conjunct my ascendant. And when I retired, one of the first things I did was I started traveling.
Wow. Yeah, I also similarly. I mean, I think that, I guess you can sort of casually get into astrology without having to destroy your entire life. But I also had to destroy my entire life in order to find astrology.
Well, I think it depends. I think it depends. It depends. If somehow, maybe you have that connection, or you grew up with parents who were very aware, and people have kind of somehow through their intuition were on track in their life, when they find astrology, if you're not that far off track, it's not that much of a change. But for me, I was so far off track of the path that the universe set out for me, that I had to destroy this to be able to get back on track. So I think it just depends how far off track we are, and not to make being off track a negative thing, because I made a whole lot of money and did a whole lot of wonderful things as a football player, but it just wasn't wasn't real for me. It wasn't speaking to the deepest part of me.
Can we talk about the money aspect of it though? Because I feel like that is, I mean, it's one of the questions that I have, and I'm sure it's also a question that our listeners would have, is like, how did you reconcile walking away from such affluence, you know?
Yeah. Well, astrologically, I have Uranus in the second. I have Uranus in the second. And one of the things that I've learned about what an astrological chart can do is it can help us tap into our and other people's priorities. Okay, priorities. And for me, obviously, it's great to be comfortable, but I'm ninth house Gemini, so my priority is experience. And so for me, the purpose of money was so that I could have the experiences that I needed to have. And so it was one day I was in my car and I had the thought of maybe I don't want to be a football player anymore. Okay. And the first thought that came up was, what about the money? Okay. And it kind of like struck me. And when I thought about it, I didn't care. And that shocked me. I was like, I don't care about those things. And then I thought, okay, what about my reputation and all those things? And at the end of the day, I was like, I don't really care about those things either. And again, it was a shock to me that I didn't value money as much as I thought I was supposed to. But I didn't.
Wow. I think that, I mean, as a second house moon, it's like, what are you doing, Ricky? No, but also at the same time, I really, really, really see it. I understand. And
yes.
No, I mean, I also have Uranus in the 12th house. So I really appreciate Uranus. I appreciate Uranian energy very much. Just had Uranus cross into my 4th house, my IC, which has been a trip. Uranus on the angles is always, it's an adventure. I also now I want to talk about, I mean, I would love to see our charts together actually as well, maybe separately, because you are the founder of an astrology dating app. When I first, in 2014, I co-founded an astrology dating app called Align with a friend from college when I was living in Los Angeles. And it was
Aligned signs with the feather.
No, pre that. It's so old at this point. Aligned Signs, I think, came after us when we were like, I can't believe they're using the same stupid name, No, we founded an app called Align, and it was from 2014 to 2016, we were working on it, building it. That was prior to that, I was working in the art world, which I thought is what I wanted to do. But it was a disaster and I was miserable, and I was slipping it when I was going through my Saturn opposition when I was 14. I think that there were a lot of like very near death experiences there. It was very possible I wasn't going to make it. Very, very hard time for me. And then at my Saturn square at around 21, a lot of that came back up. And I was just I was really, really losing myself. I didn't even know who I was. I didn't even know where to come back home to. And discovering that I was a Pisces moon was the very first piece of information that I needed in order, because I'm a Leo sun, right? So you get a lot of feedback as a Leo sun of like, oh, you love this, you love entertaining, blah, blah, blah. And all of those things are true, but it wasn't speaking to the other things that were happening, which was that one, I could read people's minds. Two, I was really, really struggling with addiction. I'm much more, I'm really sensitive. So I'm not going to just like be in center stage if someone else needs the spotlight. Like I'm obviously like, I'm a very gentle person. So nothing that I was reading about being a Leo was speaking to those qualities. So for me, it was that Pisces moon piece that I was like, oh shit, there's something here. And then adding Capricorn rising on it, adding my 8th house stellium on it, adding Sun conjunct South node, exact same degree on it. It's like, oh, I understand what we're working with. And Align, which was a really profound piece of my story, which did not end up becoming anything, is also part of my story today, because first of all, I was introduced to all of my colleagues through it because I was bringing colleagues on to be, Annabelle Gadd and the Astro Twins, who I know you're working with. That's how I started meeting people in the astrology space. I started to take lessons with them. I started to study, and slowly but surely, I realized that it wasn't actually the technology that I cared about. It was the astrology. And that was like a whole other, now I have to shatter everything up again. And now I'm closing the business, and now everything's a disaster. And now I'm out of money, and now I'm selling all my furniture, and I'm moving back to New York. And now I'm working as an administrative assistant again, because I ruined my fucking life again. And then building up to who I am today, which I think is, the truest form. But obviously when I, invited you on the show, I saw you're doing an astrology app. I'm like, oh my God, like I really want there to be an astrology dating app because I have a lot of vested interest in it. So I'm really curious to know what inspired you to want to create one, what you're building, and like how everyone could get like on board with it and figure out what's next.
Yeah.
I feel
Yeah,
very passionately.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, just hearing you speak, you said eighth house stellium, right? This having to reinvent yourself. I also have eighth house stellium.
Of course you do. Yeah, these are the people who have to blow up their whole lives to get into astrology.
Exactly. Because part of the eighth house Scorpio Pluto symbolism is about the shamanic kind of energy, right? And I think we're here to have our own processes so we can guide other people through that's very scary process. And I think, Stephen, my teacher, and we associate the eighth house very much with soulmate, deep bonded relationships. And because when you're sharing your body with someone and you're sharing your life with someone, all of your stuff gets triggered and comes to the surface. And I think relationships are the deepest form of spiritual practice. I've had many profound insights around this. And my North Node is in Libra. So relationships are really what I'm here to focus on. And so I was in a very happy marriage. I really was in a happy marriage. It was one of those marriages where we just agreed that these are your limitations, these are my limitations, and we'll just not trigger those in each other, so we can all get along. And that was great for keeping peace, but it kept me very stagnant in my own spiritual development. And so, feeling that relationship turning into a friendship and realizing that I was ready for something more in my life. I was able to have that horrible, scary conversation with my first wife, and to say, I can't do this anymore. And scary, especially difficult for a Cancer moon. We had 3 kids together. And as I walked away from that relationship, I learned so much about myself, right? That I need a partner that I can go toe to toe with. I need that passion. I need that willingness to deal with our stuff together. And so keeping that in mind, I met my current wife, Linnea, at a friend's birthday party. And the first thing I said to her, and it wasn't a pickup line, it was really, as an astrologer, I was just curious, this person I'm talking to. So I said, what's your sun sign? And she kind of looked at me and she said, I don't know my sun sign, but I'm a Pisces, and I started laughing and I said, the mystic, And she looked and she said, actually, I'm a corporate attorney. But we kept on talking, and we kept on talking. Funny, we kept on talking, and I was just, talking in these big metaphysical terms, and she was tracking me like every point of the way. And so we just kept talking, and then that conversation led to a phone call, and we just kept talking, and we were like, ended up together. And I was studying with Stephen, and so I invited her to come with me to one of Stephen's courses. He was teaching a class on Venus, and she came in and she was blown away, and it became a language we started to develop between us using astrology. And so about a year later, we took a synastry class with Stephen, and it was really my first time diving deep into relationship astrology. And Stephen Forrest is a Capricorn, so he's very organized in the way he presents the information. And the structure of his class is the first 3 days he teaches the technique. And then the last day we all put our name in a sorting hat, and he pulls a name out and he demonstrates the technique for the whole class. There's about 80 people in the room, and it was my 40th birthday. And he reached in, and I don't know if he did it because he's my friend and it was my birthday, or if he truly pulled my name out of the hat. But but either way, he spent the whole fourth of the workshop talking about mine and Linnea's relationship. He did our synastry. And there were so many little subtleties about myself that I noticed in that whole courting process and coming together with Linnea that I couldn't really grasp and understand. And as he went through that whole day breaking down our synastry, mind blowing, all these connections and all this understanding about my past relationship and how I got out and the timing of when I met Linnea and why it was so dynamic. It just made sense. Okay. It made sense. And so after that reading on the last day, you know, Linnea and I looked at each other and we were like, we have to get this information out into the world somehow. And so we approached Stephen right after class and we said, we have an idea, Stephen, you know, and we would love for you to be a part of it. He got a big smile on his face and he said, I'm in. And that's how we got started. And interestingly enough, a month after that, Renee and I ended up getting married because of we could see where we came from, we could see where we were, and we could see where we were headed, right? And so it just made sense. It just made sense.
I love that. It's so romantic, and I think I have already identified what the key distinction is between your impetus for starting an astrology dating app and where I was at. When I started mine, I was single and bitter and had no idea. I was trying to figure it out. I had not figured it out. I met my now fiance 6 months after I closed the business, and obviously, and I think that that's what the key. That's a huge, I mean, I believe in, I'm sure you believe that, because in metaphysics, like, you know, the intention that is embedded in something, whether or not it's apparent to the consumers at first, it will eventually reveal itself. You know, there's no way, because that's baked into the chart. You know, it's baked into its existence. And I do think that with my astrology dating app, I think that one of the reasons it was so endearing, and also one of the reasons it was not successful, is because it really came from that same sort of like, I'm lost, you know, I need to figure out how to make sense. Whereas with what you're working on, it came from kind of being found and then wanting to allow other people and to invite other people to have that experience. And I totally agree that partnership is an integral part to self-actualization. I think that it's, I mean, my life has changed. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if I didn't have the partner who I have. I attribute him, he's equal parts as involved in my business, in my spiritual growth, more than he even fucking realizes. And if you think about it astrologically, I mean, you only have access to half of your chart until you meet someone else. So you need to have another counterpoint to open up what the possibilities for even your individual experience could possibly be. So I think the fact that you guys saw that through synastry, had that experience, and we're like, we need to heal through love, Libra North Node. Okay, like let's do it. Makes total sense.
And we're both Libra North nodes with beautiful. our composite North Node conjunct the moon in the 11th in Libra. And so, we feel like, you know, when we first started dating, I asked her a question. I said, do you ever think about building something together? And this is way before we had the idea of Lila. And we both really vibed on that idea of coming together as, in a sense, a power couple, that we're coming together to build something together. In my old relationship, it was more of that old traditional model of the man does all the work out of the house and the woman does all the work in the house. And I grew up with a single mom who did everything. And so, it's fine for a lot of people, but for me, it wasn't. And that's really the key with Lila, that our relationship app is, we've divided into 3 dimensions, and it's a dating app, but we call it a relationship app, because
I love that.
Our first dimension that we deal with is we call it self-discovery, because the first relationship you have to have is a relationship with yourself. And more specifically, we all have unique relationship needs, right? If we try to make our relationship needs fit some kind of stereotype that we think we're supposed to fit, or some kind of ideal, you know, even if we get the relationship, we're disappointed, right? It doesn't work. And so the first part is understanding yourself and what your unique relationship needs are. And then we move to the part that's a dating app. We call it social discovery, right? This ability to meet other like-minded individuals. But the difference is we use astrology, so it's not self-reported. It's not self-report of this is what I think about myself. What does
Yeah,
the
like when you fill
astrology
out a
say
roommate
at your
survey
core?
survey and you're like, oh, I'm really neat. And then it's like, bitch, you wish you were.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I have a story of this woman I dated, and when I met her, from the outside, she just was like a go-getter, like independent, wanting to do her own thing. But as I got to know her a little more and realized she was a Cancer, she was looking for family, right? She was looking for family. And having that information allowed me to be more aware and make better choices in how we related with each other. And then the last part, which I'm most excited about with Lila, is relationship building. Because even if you find your perfect match, right? Relationships to work require process, this mutual growth and development. And in my relationship, my marriage right now, you know, astrology is so beneficial, like that, especially Mars transits in relationship. Mars transits when it's time to get something off your chest, right? It's time to get the energy moving, right? It's learning the art of intimate conflict. And I have Venus in Aries, conjunct Mars, learning the art of intimate conflict. And I think, I call it the breakdown to breakthrough ratio, that relationships are there to have because they break you down. You care about someone, you love someone enough to be vulnerable. And in that, your stuff comes up, right? And sometimes when it first comes up, it's not comfortable. And it might be a tense conversation, an argument, there might even be tears. But if the breakdown turns into a breakthrough, you know each other on a deeper level. You can appreciate and see who you're in a relationship on a deeper level. And to me, that's the beauty of this upward spiral that we can experience in relationships. Right, that we go through wonderful things, we go through difficult things, but through both of them, we're knitting something together that's allowing us to be more than we could be on our own. And the other thing about, like, because I first thought an astrology app, but these general astrology apps, I feel they're too broad for people to really get something out of it. But relationships, not just romantic relationships, relationship with our friends, with our siblings, with our parents, with our children, right? Is that if we have more information about ourselves and we have more information about them, my sense is, we'll make better choices in relationship, and relationships of all kinds will be more fulfilling for us. And the thing about relationships, it's practical, where you can see the astrology because you see it in yourself, but you see it in the people that you're closest to. And it starts to come alive and you start to have understanding of why is this person in my life? And how can we make the most out of this relationship?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that astrology has, when Luke and I met, one of the reasons that I actually decided to respond to him, because I met him on Tinder, is because I guess I had said I had just closed my app, and I was like, I just, closed my astrology dating app, and he was like, oh, what's your sun sign? And I was like, Leo. And he was like, Aries. And I was like, okay, obviously. And then he was like, do you know how, he was like, I think I'm Capricorn rising. And I'm Capricorn rising. But the fact that he even knew what a rising sign was, I was like, what? A man who knows a rising sign? Hold on. And that gave me a green light to be myself more than anything, because I knew on the first date that I could come through and I could talk about astrology and metaphysical things and tarot cards. And I already knew that he was receptive to that. So more than I cared that we both had the same rising sign, or even that he knew his rising sign, it showed me that he had that openness and that curiosity and a willingness to actually share some of the same interests that I had, that I was really scared to bring to the table in dating, because dudes would judge me for them and they would typecast me and they would say rude shit to me. And I think that one of the reasons that meeting my partner has allowed me to become myself is because I didn't have to limit and, truncate how spiritual and how magical I am, because he like fucking loves it. I'm lighting candles, I'm doing tarot cards, I'm like, making him put oil on shit, and he's all about it. And that gives me permission to really be who I am And the language that we share in spirituality and magic and consciousness is, it grounds us and it gives us something to come back to, because life is hard when you're a magic person or not. And but when you could be like, okay, what's going on in astrology, or like, what's happening here? Let's pull some cards, like let's get a different perspective. You have this common ground, you know?
I mean, I'm like getting emotional here. This is exactly what we're doing, you know. And I'm thinking about the content that for the app that Steven wrote for Pisces Moon, in you know, so we have a section in the app in self-discovery where it's like a general idea of what it means to have a Pisces moon. But then Steven created content about what does it mean to be a Pisces moon in relationships. And he speaks exactly to what you just said, you know. And I'm gonna, like, you give me permission to get on my soapbox here. Is, you know, this is the dawning of the age of Aquarius, okay? Which means we're coming out of the age of Pisces. And the myth of Pisces is sacrifice, right? And the old myth that we inherited from our parents and their parents and their parents around relationship is we get into relationship and we sacrifice who we are to make the relationship work. And that worked in the age of Pisces. But as we enter the age of Aquarius, this is the age of the individual. And I feel the shift that needs to occur in relationships is, instead of thinking, how do we have to cut off parts of ourselves and sacrifice to be together? How can you help me be more of myself? And how can I help you be more of yourself?
Yes.
And at the core, I think this is why, you know, the universe put the idea of Lila in my head, is because as we move an epoch, we move an era, we have to learn to function differently, you know? And I think one of the hardest places to value individuality is in relationships, right? And I think it's hard because a lot of times we get in relationships before we even had a chance to get to know ourselves. So how can we know what we want in someone else if we don't know ourselves yet? And this is the main reason we created Lila, to help speed up this process.
I love that. So when is the app going to be available?
So we've been developing it for, we finished our MVP about a year ago, but we've done some little bit of iteration. And so right now we're launching the beta this month in May, and we have a release date for the App Store. Steven found us a good date, July. It's after the Mercury retrograde. So we're launching in the App Store at the end of July. And I'm not sure in your experience, but one of the things as a CEO of a tech company, you know, to be able to build an app is expensive. And so I had to go out and raise money. And it's been really interesting, you know, being an African-American retired football player, pitching a tech app in astrology, you know, and the looks that I get from the VCs that, you know, that we've been pitching. And one of the things that I found, mostly males, and most of our friends and family and people that have invested in Lila are women, which is interesting. It's interesting. And so, you know, having that feeling, pitching VCs and getting a sense, I made a bold move and I said, you know, I feel like there's a lot of people out there in the world that really get astrology and want to see something like this happen and know that astrology is going to be a big part of the future. And so we decided to launch an equity crowdfunding campaign to allow people that are truly passionate, the people that get astrology, to help us build this and enjoy the upside, instead of, you know, sitting there and trying to convince people that don't believe in astrology and only want to make money that this is something that is good for the world. And so so we launched a crowdfunding campaign, and that's felt really good to allow more people to be a part of this whole project.
Yeah, I think that I think that's a really smart idea because, yeah, I mean, I can't imagine, because our realities and who we are so different physically and what our stories were. But when I was a 24-year-old woman going into these VC rooms, talking about an astrology dating app, ending up with people just trying to fuck me at the end of the conversation, that was not what I was going in for. You know, nobody took me seriously.
I didn't have that problem, but yeah.
Nobody cared. Nobody was investing. And then I look at CoStar, which launched 2 months after we closed, pitched the same investors. And there's a reason that its app is nasty, right? Because that is retention, right? That is how you keep people on, is that they're preying on people's paranoias and anxieties and fears.
It's so bad.
Yes. And
people
those are
read
the
CoStar,
notifications.
it creates a fight. it creates a
Exactly.
fight. It doesn't
But that's
create
how they
space.
were able, because the question that
Don't
the
get me
VC
started.
is kept asking me, in addition to, are you single, is what, how are you going to keep people interested? And it's like, for me, it's like astrology. Astrology is fascinating and it's always changing and interesting, but that, because VCs don't know anything about it, by and large, not to say that there aren't a few who do, God bless you if you're listening and you're a VC who likes astrology, but by and large, it's not really the thing. So the question was, what are the KPIs? How are, what is cost per acquisition? How are you going to keep people in the app? How are you going to scale? And I guess CoStar's answer was, we're going to scare them to death. We're going to say these really nasty, rude things to them that don't even have any astrological significance, just to get them addicted to the negative, the toxicity of
The
it,
drama.
which is so
Wow.
antithetical to like what astrology is. It's supposed to make you feel good, not make you feel shitty. And I do think that a lot of people, like, I feel like I'm doing damage control for people who've had CoStar all of these years, where I say like, oh, we have eclipse season coming up, and suddenly, is it bad? Is it scary? Is my life going to be over? And I get that there's like a doomsday nature to astrology, but why is that become so pervasive? I think it's because of apps like CoStar that are manipulating people into thinking the worst, when instead you could think, well, wow, opportunities, new change, new energy, like shifts are happening. Where are they going to take place? And not just assume that your life is going to fall apart because there's a fucking eclipse.
Well, this is what I was speaking to earlier about the belief system that underlies any kind of language. And I think the current belief system in our culture is materialism. And if you're a materialist, if you believe in materialism, and I don't mean objects per se, I mean, you think that you are your body, that eventually there is going to be the end of it because you're going to die. And if you don't have any connection to what is beyond the physical, then that creates a limited belief system, and all you can do is go to this dark place. And for me, I feel like what I'm really selling with Lila is not even astrology. I'm selling the fact that life is meaningful, right? That if there's an eclipse, it's not because something bad is going to happen. It's an opportunity, right? The universe, it's like the weather, right? The universe is giving you an opportunity to enjoy the weather, okay? Right.
Yes.
And if you're afraid of it and you run away, then yeah, your experience isn't going to be great. But if you embrace it I think of astrology as a gift that we've been given to be able to communicate with the cosmos.
Yes, I
And I
agree.
feel like our ancient ancestors living in in a chaotic world, and they didn't have television, they didn't have Netflix, so they looked up at the sky. And what they saw was there's order. There is order. And they could superimpose that order on their chaotic lives, and it helped them make sense of their lives. So I feel I'm trying to bring that back so people believe that everything that's happened in your life has happened for you, not to you.
Yes, absolutely. And that we have agency, and that we have permission, and that we are worthy of like living full experiences, and not having to feel like we need to shove ourselves into these tiny boxes that were basically because other people, established them on our behalf before we even had any say to determine whether or not we wanted to be in a box. And I think that is, astrology, when I was writing my book last year, and I kept saying, because we're in our New York City apartment, and I kept saying to my partner, and Uranus is crossing my IC. So I keep being like, I need space. And then I was like, of course I'm a fucking astrologer. Of course I need space. I need the whole universe. I need so much space that I'm looking at like the trans-Neptunian planets in order to imagine more space. That's how much I need space. But I don't need space because I don't need space in the physical. I need space in the astral. And I think that growing up in the circumstances that I did, growing up in a very small apartment, growing up with a very sick mom, I had to go into my brain. I had to go into my psyche in order to create more sense and more opportunity, and to expand my horizons more. And with that as my template, then to be able to use astrology, to use experiences, and then to actually see like the world itself is so spacious and vast, and our experiences could be so spacious and vast. And that is like the mirror of self and microcosm, macrocosm, you know? I just love astrology so much. It's so beautiful.
That's a really like wonderful description of Uranus and the IC. Like that's beautiful. Again, this is wonderful. You know, just talking to a sister. You know, it feels like this. So yeah, I'm just really moved
by
by
that.
this
I'm really happy
conversation.
to meet you, and I'm so excited for you to be able to bring life to Lila, and for people to be able to have the experience of getting to know self, getting to know other, and then figuring out how to be in partnership, because that's a whole other can of worms, but an important one. Are you going to have composite charts on there?
We are going to have
That's
composite charts.
so
It's going to be part of
cool.
relationship building, because you know, and I'm finding very helpful the transits to the composite chart. You know, helping the whole idea of the composite chart to realize that the relationship is an entity to itself, and if you want it to keep going, you have to pay attention to the relationship and take care of it.
Yes, absolutely. My composite chart with my partner is that we are actually a Gemini Sun and Moon in the 5th house, and with a
Oh,
Capricorn rising, that's a midpoint between ours, of course. So Pluto has crossed it. Pluto has been an integral part of like our relationship story. It's the composite chart, I think, just unlocks this whole other dimension of once you've established your relationship, then the relationship has a life of its own that you both can come back to and speak to. So I'm so
well, you know
excited about your app.
what's fascinating about evolutionary astrology in synastry is we look at the composite south node to understand, you know, the history of the relationship, you know, because my sense is any two people that feel a connection in this life, they've had a connection in a previous life, and to be able to understand the dynamics of that connection. So really using the south node in synastry, it's a whole nother ball game.
Yeah. Oh man, this is so exciting. So for our listeners who are also just as eager to start using this as possible, and then also to just get to know you and your work more, where can we find you?
Yeah, so our website is heylila, HEYLILA.com. And on the website, you can sign up for our mailing list, and you can sign up to be on our list of beta testers. And again, we'll start beta testing here in the next couple of weeks. And so it's getting real.
Super exciting. Congratulations. And thank you again so much for being on this show. And it feels like a real pleasure to get to know you.
Yeah, hopefully we'll get to speak again sometime, because I'd love to keep in touch.
Yes, me too. Me too. Okay, I'm going to close this, and then I'm just going to turn the recording off here.